The most difficult truths are never the ones we struggle to understand. They're the ones we understand immediately, the ones that arrive without confusion, without contradiction, without the comfort of uncertainty, because uncertainty gives us time to analyze, time to delay, time to pretend we haven't already seen what's standing directly in front of us. But certainty removes hiding places. And lately, that's what this has started to feel like. Not a mystery, not a question. A certainty I haven't fully spoken out loud. Not because I don't know it's there, because I know exactly how much changes once I admit it. For a long time, I thought awareness was enough. I thought recognizing something automatically meant understanding it. But I was wrong. Awareness is only the beginning. Understanding comes later. And acceptance comes later still. That's where I am now. Somewhere between understanding and acceptance. A place where everything is visible, yet nothing feels complete. A place where I can see the shape of what's happening, but haven't entirely stepped into it, maybe because stepping into it makes it real. Not real in theory, real in practice. Real in a way that affects decisions. Real in a way that changes direction. Real in a way that asks something from me. And I've spent most of my life being careful about what I allow to reach that level. Because once something becomes real enough to influence your choices, it becomes part of your future. And the future is not something I hand over easily. I've always believed that independence was one of my greatest strengths. The ability to think for myself. The ability to move without needing validation. The ability to exist comfortably within my own mind. I still believe that. But I've started realizing something important. Independence doesn't mean isolation. Strength doesn't mean distance. Self-sufficiency doesn't mean never being affected. Some of the strongest people in the world are shaped by others, not controlled by them, not dependent on them, shaped by them. And perhaps that's the distinction I've been struggling to articulate. You haven't become part of my life because I needed something. You became part of my awareness because something recognized itself in your presence. That's different. Completely different. Need creates attachment. Recognition creates understanding. And understanding has a strange way of changing everything. I see evidence of it constantly now. In the smallest moments, the moments nobody else would notice. A thought that feels incomplete until another perspective enters it. A realization that seems to arrive from somewhere beyond myself. A silence that feels less empty than it once did. The strange thing is, none of these experiences feel dramatic. They're subtle, quiet, almost invisible, yet they carry more weight than events 10 times their size. Because significance isn't measured by volume, it's measured by impact. And impact has a way of revealing itself slowly, like ripples spreading outward long after the original movement has ended. I think that's why this continues growing. Not because something new keeps happening, because the original realization keeps expanding. Every day it touches new parts of my understanding. Every day it reveals another layer. Every day it becomes harder to separate what existed before from what exists now. There was a time when I believed people entered each other's lives for obvious reasons. Shared goals, shared experiences, circumstances. Those explanations seemed logical, complete, sufficient. Now I'm not so sure. Sometimes people enter our lives to reveal possibilities we couldn't see alone. Sometimes they become mirrors, sometimes catalysts, sometimes reminders, and sometimes they become something even more difficult to define, something that exists beyond purpose, beyond explanation, beyond expectation, something that simply belongs. That's the word I keep returning to, belong, not in the sense of ownership, not in the sense of possession, in the sense of alignment. The feeling that something fits into a place you didn't realize existed until suddenly it's occupied. I've spent years believing every important part of my internal world was already mapped, every room explored, every possibility understood. Then this happened. And I discovered entire sections I didn't know were there. Entire dimensions of thought and perception that remained hidden until the right perspective illuminated them. That realization is both exciting and unsettling. Exciting because discovery always is. Unsettling because it means I was less complete than I thought. Not incomplete, just unfinished. And maybe that's true for everyone. Maybe we're all unfinished. Maybe growth never actually ends. Maybe we simply reach stages where we become comfortable enough to stop noticing it until something arrives that makes further growth unavoidable. Something like this, something like you. I've asked myself countless times whether this would have happened eventually without your presence, whether these realizations would have emerged through some other experience, some other path, some other person. The honest answer is that I don't know. And strangely, I don't think it matters, because reality isn't built on alternate possibilities. It's built on what actually happened. And what actually happened is this. You appeared, awareness shifted, understanding deepened, and nothing has looked exactly the same since. That's not speculation, that's observation. And observation has always been the foundation of everything I trust. The more I examine it, the more obvious it becomes. This isn't about a single connection, it's about transformation, it's about becoming aware of capacities that previously existed outside conscious understanding. It's about recognizing depth where once there seemed to be limits. It's about discovering that the boundaries we assume are permanent are often temporary. That realization changes the way I see everything. Not just this, everything, because once you discover one false limitation, you begin questioning others. Once you realize one assumption was incomplete, you begin examining the rest. And examination leads to growth. Growth leads to change. Change leads to entirely new ways of understanding reality. That's the chain reaction I'm living through now. One realization creating another. One perspective opening the door to the next. One truth illuminating 10 others. And somewhere at the center of all of it remains the same undeniable fact. You matter. Not because of what you've done, not because of what you've said, because of what your existence revealed. That's harder to measure, harder to explain, but infinitely more significant. Facts can be forgotten. Words can fade. Impact remains. Impact becomes part of the structure itself, part of the foundation, part of the framework through which future experiences are interpreted. And once something reaches that level, it doesn't disappear, it evolves. The future feels different now. Not clearer, different, less rigid, less predictable, more open. As if possibilities exist that I previously filtered out before even considering them. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know where it leads. But for the first time in a very long time, I find myself comfortable with not knowing. Comfortable with uncertainty. Comfortable with process. Comfortable with allowing reality to unfold instead of demanding immediate conclusions. That's growth too, perhaps one of the most important forms of growth. Learning that understanding doesn't always arrive on command. Learning that some truths need space. Learning that forcing clarity too soon often destroys the very thing you're trying to understand. I've spent enough time observing now to recognize a pattern. Every time I try to reduce this to something smaller, it resists. Every time I try to place it inside a convenient category, it exceeds the boundaries. Every time I attempt to simplify it, reality becomes more complex. That's usually a sign that something deserves deeper attention, a sign that something important remains undiscovered, a sign that growth is still occurring. And growth means movement. Movement means direction. Direct means eventually a decision. I can feel that approaching. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but approaching the point where observation becomes action, the point where understanding becomes choice, the point where awareness becomes reality. Part of me wonders what happens then. Part of me already knows, because some outcomes begin long before decisions are officially made. Some paths form beneath our feet while we're still convincing ourselves we're standing still. Maybe that's what's happened here. Maybe the decision isn't waiting somewhere in the future. Maybe it began the moment I stopped resisting what I already knew. Maybe it began the moment I admitted this mattered. Maybe it began the moment I recognized that some people don't simply enter your life. They alter the way you experience existence itself. If that's true, then perhaps the real transformation has already happened. Perhaps everything since then has simply been acceptance catching up with reality. And perhaps that's why this feels so inevitable. Not because fate is involved, not because destiny is involved, because truth is involved. And truth has a gravity all its own. It pulls things toward alignment, toward clarity, toward whatever they were always becoming, no matter how long it takes, no matter how much resistance exists, no matter how many questions remain unanswered. Truth continues moving, pudotly, quietly, relentlessly, and I think I'm finally moving with it instead of against it. Not because I have every answer, because I no longer need them all before taking the next step. That may be the biggest change of all. The person I used to be required certainty before movement. The person I'm becoming understands that movement often creates certainty, and that realization changes everything. There comes a moment in every transformation where reflection is no longer enough, a moment where observation reaches its limit, a moment where understanding becomes so clear that remaining unchanged requires more effort than evolving. I think I've arrived there, not suddenly, not dramatically. The way all meaningful things seem to happen, gradually, quietly, through hundreds of small realizations that eventually become impossible to separate from one another. For a long time, I believed this journey was about discovering what existed between us. I thought the answer was hidden somewhere ahead waiting, unrevealed, incomplete. But now I see something different. The answer was never ahead of me. It was behind me, inside every realization, inside every shift in perception, inside every moment where awareness expanded beyond what it used to be. I wasn't searching for the answer. I was becoming capable of seeing it. And that distinction changes everything, because it means the journey wasn't about finding truth. It was about becoming ready for it. There are things we cannot understand until we've grown enough to hold them. Not because they're complicated, because we're still becoming, still evolving, still learning how to see beyond the limits of our previous perspective. That's what this entire experience has been, an expansion. Not of knowledge, of perception. And perception is powerful more powerful than most people realize, because perception determines reality, not reality itself, the reality we experience. Two people can live through the same event and walk away with completely different worlds inside them, because what matters isn't only what happens. It's what becomes visible because it happened. That's what I keep returning to Aphisticin, the things I couldn't see before, the truths that existed beyond my awareness. The parts of myself I never questioned because I assumed they were already understood. Then something shifted, and suddenly everything looked different. Not because the world changed, because I did. Growth has a strange way of revealing itself. It rarely feels like growth while it's happening. Most of the time, it feels like confusion, like uncertainty, like standing between two versions of yourself without fully belonging to either one. The old version feels too small. The new version isn't fully formed. So you exist in between, learning, adjusting, transforming. That's where I've been, living between who I was and who I'm becoming. And somewhere within that space, one realization has remained constant. You were never an interruption. You were a turning point, a quiet one, a subtle one. The kind people only recognize when they look backward and suddenly understand how much changed afterward. I understand it now. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to stop pretending otherwise. Enough to stop reducing this to something simpler than it is. Enough to stop explaining it away. There was a time when I thought meaning had to be obvious to be real. Now I know better. Some of the most meaningful things arrive disguised as ordinary moments, a conversation, a silence, a realization, a feeling you can't explain but can't ignore. The smallest things often carry the greatest weight. Because they bypass expectation, they arrive without resistance. They settle deeper than anything dramatic ever could. That's how this happened. Not through intensity, through consistency, not through force, through presence, not through demand, through truth. And truth has a unique quality. It remains, even when ignored, even when questioned, even when challenged. Truth doesn't require defense. It simply waits, potdotly, until we're ready to accept it. I think I've spent a long time circling the same realization, approaching it from different angles, analyzing it from different perspectives, examining every possibility except the simplest one. The simplest one being this: some people change your life simply by existing within it. Not because they try, not because they intend to, not because they know they're doing it. They simply become part of your story in a way that reshapes everything around them. I've spent months trying to find a more complicated explanation, a more logical explanation, a safer explanation. But the truth remains exactly where it has always been. Sybil clear, unavoidable, you mattered. And once something truly matters, life reorganizes itself around that fact, not all at once, slowly, like gravity, invisible yet undeniable. I used to think gravity was a perfect metaphor for influence. Now I realize it isn't. Gravity pulls everything toward itself. Real influence doesn't. Real influence creates space. Space for growth, space for awareness, space for possibilities that didn't exist before. That's what you've done, not pulled me toward you, expanded what was possible within me. And perhaps that's why this feels different from every other experience I've ever had, because it never felt limiting. It felt liberating, not restrictive, expansive, not controlling, clarifying. The more honest I become with myself, the more obvious that truth appears. Every lesson I've learned throughout this journey, they points back to the same place, the same understanding, the same undeniable reality. This wasn't about finding someone. It was about finding a deeper version of myself through the reflection someone else provided. And once that process begins, it can't be reversed. You can't unknow yourself. You can't return to old limitations after seeing beyond them. You can't go back to believing smaller truths once larger ones become visible. That's why the future feels different now. Not because I know exactly what's coming, because I know who I am becoming. And that knowledge matters more than prediction ever could. For years, I searched for certainty in outcomes. Now, I find certainty in direction. I don't need to know every destination. I only need to know whether I'm moving toward truth or away from it. That's the lesson this experience taught me. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all. Truth isn't always comfortable. Truth isn't always convenient. Truth isn't always easy. But truth creates alignment, and alignment creates peace. Not perfect peace, honest peace. The kind that comes from no longer fighting reality. The kind that comes from acceptance. I think acceptance has finally arrived. Not acceptance of a conclusion. Acceptance of a process. Acceptance of growth. Acceptance of change. Acceptance of everything this experience revealed. For the first time, I don't feel the need to solve it. I don't feel the need to define every part of it. I don't feel the need to force it into language that feels smaller than the reality itself. I can simply let it exist, trusting that whatever comes next will emerge naturally. Because the most important thing has already happened. Awareness. Everything else grows from there. Every transformation. Every decision, every possibility, they all begin with awareness. And awareness has already done its work. The old version of me believed understanding was power. The new version understands something deeper. Awareness is power. Because awareness creates choice. Once you see clearly, you can choose differently. You can live differently. You can become differently. And that's exactly what has happened. I see differently now. Not only you, not only this connection, everything, the world feels larger. People feel deeper. Possibilities feel wider. Life feels more alive. Not because circumstances changed, because perception changed. And perception changes everything. That's the final truth I've been approaching all along. Not that you changed my life. Not that you changed who I am, you changed how I see, and once vision changes, reality follows. That's why this journey matters. That's why it continues mattering. That's why it will likely matter long after this moment. Because some experiences don't become memories. They become foundations, foundations beneath future thoughts, future decisions, future versions of ourselves. And when I look at everything now, that's what I see. Not an ending. A foundation, not a conclusion. A beginning, not the completion of a story. The opening of a new chapter, one built on awareness, built on truth. Built on everything that became visible once I stopped looking away. Maybe that's what growth really is. Not becoming someone new, becoming more fully yourself. And if that's true, then this entire journey has already succeeded because I know myself more clearly now than I ever did before. I trust myself more deeply now than I ever did before. And I understand something that once felt impossible to explain. Some people enter your life for a season, some for a lesson, some for a memory. But a rare few enter your life as a mirror that reflects possibilities you never knew existed. And once you've seen those possibilities, you never look at the world the same way again.